Ms. Meschino of Hull.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you to the members. I rise in support of House 49112, and I have to say I'm absolutely excited to be here. The 2050 roadmap reflects a shared priority and is the result of a tremendous amount of stakeholder engagement. I'm excited to address you today as we take this important step, just a step, there's more work to be done, in our work on the climate crisis. As you all know, I represent coastal communities, and the residents of my district have been experiencing the direct and dynamic impacts of the climate crisis for years. Rising tides, coastal flooding, frequent, more intense storms, storm surges. We commit huge financial investments to adaptation and resilience, and I believe we have an obligation to tackle the underlying problems, the mitigation as well, and that's what we're doing here today. Climate crisis issues present as public safety, public health, environmental health, and social justice impacts. However, the solution is actually economic. It's the decarbonization of our economy. And as you heard much more eloquently than I'll say now from the chair, in 2008, the legislature had the foresight and the wisdom to take the first key steps to commit to emission reductions by enacting the Global Warming Solutions Act. The GWSA set those initial emission reduction goals and mandated a framework through which EEA would take up this work. And the policies and the programs that flowed from that initial commitment to make those initial carbon emission reductions has made Massachusetts a leader. Thinking back over the past 10 years, we've undertaken numerous initiatives that the chair eloquently outlined. And in fact, during that time, as he also noted, we gleaned about 110,000 green energy jobs. And we learned that tackling these initiatives is actually good for our economy as well. The challenge has been that the GWSA was largely focused initially on energy, and you heard the chair talk about that too, greening the grid, and then the Commonwealth's efforts around that. Since that time, have largely been disjointed, though, from other major emissions sectors, such as transportation, which we know in Massachusetts is 43% of our current emissions right now. The Commonwealth is long overdue in taking the next key steps, and therein lies our challenge. We need a plan. I filed the 2050 roadmap because we need a plan to achieve the Commonwealth's carbon emission reduction goal. The 2050 roadmap is the critical updates to the GWSA that's going to get us there together. The bill resets the carbon emission reduction target to net zero by 2050 to align with current science. It requires a backcast analysis, and all that really is determining what the schedule of emission reductions need to be, and then figuring out what the strategies are that we're going to use to achieve those reductions. The analysis will result in a people-centric plan that engages across all the other sectors, right? So transportation, buildings, industry, land use. And it will involve multiple pathways, almost an iterative process, if you will. The planning will assess the impacts to and will prioritize workforce development for low-income and environmental justice communities, and the bill will establish strong 2030 and 2040 interim emission limits and will require much more robust reporting that will lead to transparency and accountability to the public as well as to the legislature. The bill will drive the research and the planning and the action that we will take over the next 30 years. It's the signal, the clear signal to the businesses and about the Commonwealth, the priorities and its longstanding commitment to clean energy and to environmental health. We are transforming our economy right now, and we need to be thoughtful and intentional so that all residents of the Commonwealth enjoy public health, public safety, and economic benefits. As we like to say in Hull, the rising tide lifts all boats. I'd just like to take a moment to note that our Senate colleague and the primary author of the Global Warming Solutions Act, the gentleman from Taunton, has filed a very similar companion bills. And he understands as well that we need to make these critical updates. This is a consensus bill. I'd also like to take a moment, now that I've mentioned him, to thank one of the other primary authors of the GWSA. It's a former colleague and a mentor to me, the Honorable Frank Smizik. We owe him a debt of gratitude for his work on the original GWSA, and he had inspired me to tackle the needed updates to the GWSA, and I was really proud that he placed with me that responsibility to really rework his initial bill and to refile it as the 2050 roadmap. And I just want to make sure we take a moment to remember our colleague and our friend and to thank him for all of the great work that he did in this space. I also want to acknowledge my sister legislators from Somerset, Cambridge, and Holliston for contributing terrific legislation to this bill. And I'd like to thank my fabulous aide, Colette Medulla. I know we stand here and we take all the credit, but let's be honest, it's these young staffers who just keep us ruthlessly organized, and she was just terrific, and I was really sorry to see her leave, but she's going on to law school, and I'm super proud of her, and she'll be fantastic. I'd also like to thank the Coalition of Environmental Advocates, scientists, public health officials, business groups, who came together and stayed together in the advocacy of this bill. Again, it's a shared priority, and I think that's what really made it move through the legislative process so quickly. I'd like to thank the chairs, both the gentleman from Lennox for his kind words and for his early and steadfast and very vocal support of the bill, as well as for his staff's expertise in shaping the original bill. Robert Libben really helped me to draft this in the committee, and it was really greatly appreciated, and I feel very confident standing here in front of you today recommending that piece of it to you. And I'd also like to thank the gentleman from Lowell, my chairman, for his patience, his guidance, and his wisdom, and also for championing this bill and bringing it to the floor during the legislative session. But mostly, Mr. Speaker, I'd actually like to thank you. Every step of the way on this work has been an ongoing dialogue with stakeholders externally, but also with you and with your staff. Back in January, you remarked publicly, took me by surprise, but you remarked publicly about your commitment to passing the 2050 roadmap and making these critical updates and achieving net zero carbon emissions. And in that moment, you elevated this subject matter, and you have kept the climate crisis at the forefront since then. And even though we've been dealing and addressing with the pandemic, and that is a public health crisis, an emergency in the moment, you reiterated your support that you were going to take this forward and take action this session. And we're here today thanks to you. It's been a pleasure working on this with all of you, and in conclusion, I just want to say thank you again. I'm super excited to be here, and I urge all of my colleagues to join me in voting for the bill and taking this important step to creating a roadmap to a clean and thriving Commonwealth. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.